Hello, I'm Dr. Basil Considine. I'm here from the ACU Online Writing Center, and today we're going to be talking about how to support policies with data. Specifically, how to locate, parse, and then refer to information to support your argument, proposed policy, changes, actions, whatever it should be. Now, this is part of a sequence of courses where we look at different tasks that are required in our academic programs, and it happens that this one is drawing on an assignment in the D&P program, the BSN to D&P pipeline. But the basic principles for locating scholarly and other sources of formal, official literature and data are going to be applicable. So if you're not in that program, don't worry, hang around. And although the specifics of the assignment will vary, the principles will be the same for your task as well. And if you're wondering at how to adapt something, just send us an email at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu, and we're happy to answer. We work with students not just through webinars like this and answering emails, but also through appointments and providing resources like templates. If you're looking for more extended feedback, perhaps on a paper draft, or you're starting a process of researching or planning out how to interpret an assignment, you can sign up for an appointment with us. We have asynchronous appointments where you send in your draft with any special requests for feedback. We email you comments and suggestions and other pieces of feedback. And you can also have a phone or Zoom appointment, an appointment in real time, so you can ask questions back and forth. Which works best for you? Often students will switch back and forth depending on the assignment and what sorts of questions they have or what sorts of feedback they want at that point. Especially if it's a more extended piece of writing like a thesis or a dissertation or doctoral project. All of our services are 100% free to you, so take advantage of them. You can make up to 2 appointments per week normally, appointments availability permitting. Now, if you're not already familiar with it, on our Writing Webinars page, you have not just a alphabetical listing of all the webinar recordings and not just a calendar listing of the different webinars that we have for this semester, but also this tabbed guide where you can scroll down and select the particular program you're in and see exactly all the ties we have. In fact, let's take a look at that right now. I'm here on the Writing Webinars webpage, and at the top you can see there's a link to all the information for accessing a webinar. And then we scroll down and we see the calendar of all the upcoming webinars. And then past that is where we find the tabbed guide here. So for example, if you're in the HCAD program, you can select that. If you're in nursing D&P, you'll see that we start with some general interest webinars, and then we start moving our way through the different course sequence in the order that you would be taking them. So let's say that you were in nursing 655 and see, oh, there's something for week 3, there's something for week 1. When this webinar posts, there'll be something for week 5 here as well. And if you're continuing through the program, you can see we have different webinars that are targeted for those classes too. So many students will mark their calendar with the webinar tie-in to watch it as after they have finished the last week's assignment, so that they can just start thinking about it and organize their thoughts, perhaps start building that outline before they do the reading, because they know the outline will tell them a lot of the types of information to be paying attention to, that when they find that in the reading, they can add that information to their outline and thus have a more efficient research, study, and writing process. All right, let's head back to our slide deck. Now, you'll see me referring to our APA course paper template later. We also have a YouTube channel for watching our videos on the go, and of course our blog. So our main learning objectives today, we're going to look at the assignment that is the catalyst for discussion, and then we're going to talk about how to identify literature using the library catalog, and then how to integrate those two and be embarking on the outline and drafting, and how to refer to these things that you're identifying in your writing. So let's take a look at the assignment. This is from Nursing 655, the Week 5 assignment number 1, Determining Strength for Your Policy. It's coming from the Advanced Clinical Practice course. Now, this description begins with the preamble, and I always like to separate the larger body of instructions for the assignment sheet between a preamble that is kind of focusing you and see how this fits into the big picture with what you're actually being asked to explicitly do. So in this case, it starts with this preamble. A healthcare policy is a way to communicate evidence-based practice to the end users. It should always include the best available evidence and not be based solely on personal or expert opinion. Occasionally, evidence is conflicting, and in addition to falling back on your guiding principles, ethics can come into play. And then we have some questions to think about. In all policies, what should guide our behavior? What is in the best interest of the patient? What if the evidence wasn't taken into consideration or isn't as strong as we would like to support change? What are the alternatives to not updating the policy, and how does this impact the patient? So these are great guiding questions to think about as you embark on the reading. And now we come to the instructions for what you're supposed to do, what you're actually supposed to be writing. In this assignment, you will assess the strength of the evidence for your policy from week 1 and consider the ethical dilemmas to updating or not updating clinical practice. And to this end, complete a literature search in the ACU library and find 5 articles representing the highest level of evidence you can find in support of the policy or policy update you plan on completing. And first, you should be doing a rapid appraisal for the 5 articles, which you want to be referring to the course reading and for this week, the course textbook, looking at Appendix B, using the form that aligns with the study methodology. So, for example, if it's a phenomenological study, that's going to be a different form than if it's a quantitative study that's reporting on your clinical trial results or something like that. And whichever form you're going to be using will be included as an appendix with your paper. Now, we move on to the paper that was described. So we have this research phase, and then we have the write-up. Write a 2 to 3 page paper with 3 to 5 references. Now, we're probably going to have more than just 3 references because we have 5 appraisals, and so very likely it's going to be 5 references for one for each of those appraisals. Your paper should have the following components: introduction, discussion of the 2 main strengths, overall thoughts on the strength of the evidence in support of the policy update or development, and include at least one ethical argument for or against using or not using the evidence in the policy update or development, followed by the conclusion. So 2 to 3 pages, that's roughly 500 to 750 words, not counting the references, not counting the title page. So that's going to be fairly focused, and so I don't think you'll have too much trouble with that at this point. But let's talk about the research process after we review the paper specifications and the rubric. So note that we have that note 3 to 5 references less than 5 years old. So this should be research that is recent. No going back to 2000. There's lots of things were different there, including the healthcare environment in the United States, because that was well before the Affordable Care Act was passed. We have thus a requirement when we're going to be searching for these 5 articles that you're going to appraise that it be recent, as defined here as less than 5 years old. And if we review the rubric here, we see that, okay, that discussion should be somewhat substantial. The ethical argument section should not just be a couple sentences. We're having 30% of the points going there, so that should be a fair portion of your paper. And that you should be formatting this in APA style. We'll talk about some of the particular constraints there. So now let's take a look at the literature search portion. Now, when you are doing a search, it's important to keep in mind what your goals are. What are the outcomes that you want from this? And that will determine how you do the search and whether you're going to be trying to do an exhaustive search or a quick focused literature search, which is, if you're doing just asked to get 5 sources, is probably what you're going for. If you are writing a doctoral project, and this is the capstone of your degree, and you are trying to be comprehensive to explore all that there is on a particular subject or application, that is a different situation from, hey, this is assignment you have this week, and you may be using this, but again, it's not going to be something where you're trying to pass judgment on the totality of it. So let's ask a couple questions, like, are you trying to get a quick sense of the available literature? And are you doing an exhaustive search within the constraints? Like, are you specifically trying to do a systematic or meta review or a survey of literature on a very narrow topic? Now, in music, for example, we have music research guides that will try and do things like have, oh, here is every single piece of scholarly literature on, say, Verdi or Donizetti or Rossini or Wagner, perhaps. And these are usually fairly large volumes. That is probably not what you're trying to do for this assignment, because 5 sources, only 2 to 3 pages of write-up, there's only so much you can do there. But if you're trying to get a quick sense of, okay, here's some of the arguments out there, some, not all, then a quick focused literature search sounds great. And if your answer is no, then maybe you want to go in another direction, something that will have more extensive reading. Like if you are working on the foundations of your dissertation or doctoral project, okay, you might be wanting to track systematically what's out there, and even though you're just writing up a couple now, the goal is to eventually have that systematic outcome. So with that, let's continue forward. And a couple guiding principles. Use broad restrictions first. Again, for this quick search. So if it's something like, oh, let's narrow down the date range, do that at the start. Try a couple different keyword combinations to make sure you're finding the sorts of stuff you're looking for. Look at tagging of articles. How are they subject coded, for example? Or what is branched off from that? What is recommended as similar literature by the database, perhaps? If you have very few results, broaden your search, so take out some of those broad restrictions. If you get a ton, look at ways you might narrow things down some more. Now, about those broad restrictions. Well, some examples. You might restrict things to peer-reviewed journal articles only, which is something we do a lot in graduate nursing studies because we want things to be grounded in evidence-based practice. And we want what we're examining, by and large, to be something that's gone through some sort of rigorous process, including peer review. For the purposes of weekly assignments, you almost always want to work with what you have full text access to immediately, because while our interlibrary loan staff are great, sometimes it does take more than a couple days to get some results, and you do need to get this paper in and move on to the next assignment. Recent literature, which is broadly accepted as being last 5 years. For this particular assignment, it is last 5 years. But depending on the topic, you might have something that you reach back a little bit further, or if, say, you were looking at public health nursing in the age of COVID, we're not really the age of COVID until we hit 2020, March 2020 in the United States. So if you're doing something like that, you might have even narrower search in the last 5 years. You might just do last 3. Language restrictions. Now, I happen to be bilingual in French, so I read French literature a lot. But you might say, well, okay, I could read that, but that will take me more time, or it's more likely on another setting, which brings us to the geographic restrictions. You are probably going to be looking at research conducted in the United States only to try and get it the most applicable, the most generalizable to. Because if we're, say, talking the British National Health Service, that is a very different set of public health services than we have in the United States, where for a large portion of the policy that only kicks in when you get on Medicare, when you pass 65. And so if you're trying to find things that are very applicable to the setting, having some things in common, like the general framework for how insurance and healthcare are paid for, might be very helpful. You might also try some keyword combinations, like, say, if you're searching for leadership, collective leadership, or shared leadership, or collective and shared leadership together. By the way, if that's a search string there for that bullet point, the OR in caps, that's telling the search engine, oh, search for what's in quotes, or this other thing that's in quotes, or that other thing, any of those three is fine. And we see this again with secondary school. It's saying, okay, secondary school is fine, but if you don't find secondary school, we find high school, that's also fine. Or the last, where often the literature will use various euphemisms to disguise the fact that we're talking about an uncomfortable subject of people losing their jobs. When you are looking at something in a search engine, as we will be doing, you can also look at how it's classified to see if there's similar things that you want to look at, or any keywords that have been assigned, or if it's been cited in something else. And then we talked about the broaden with a few, narrow with a lot already. So, 2 starting points. Now, this assignment specifically says to do the search through the ACU library, so we're going to go through the ACU Distance Education portal. Some students prefer to use something like Google Scholar for at least their preliminary look, because they happen to like the search interface and how it displays things. That's a matter of preference. If you find it in Google Scholar, probably you'll be coming back to the ACU library to access it later. And there's a way that you can integrate the two where if you talk with our library staff, they can walk you through it. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at some of this searching now. Now for reference, this is the main ACU library portal. And this is the distance education portal here, the distance learning portal. Now, it leads to the same thing, ACU OneSearch, but it does give you a couple things right away if you are going to narrow the search, like selecting limit to peer reviewed. Now, let's say that we are talking about emergency room triage. Now, one of the things there is that whether it's emergency room or emergency department is something that often varies regionally, or you might even be lumped in under emergency medicine. So if I'm doing a search here, I might start with giving these synonyms. Say, okay, I want to see that and triage. Now, I do this search, and I don't know how much is going to come up first. But when this comes up with 1.2 million, I say, okay, that is very, very broad still. Limiting it to peer-reviewed has not cut that down to anything I would vaguely say is a number I could parse here. So now I can start adding some more restrictions. Now if we look on the left-hand side, we can see, oh, limit to full text. Yes. There may be many articles out there that are great, but if I can't access them in time for the assignment, not so great. Now, full text access has only knocked things down to just a little bit under 1 million sources, so I still have an awful lot to work with. And remember, this assignment, we are supposed to be using last 5 years, so let's broadly take things down to 2019, say. 2019, 2020, 2021, 2022. So that's 4 years there. So you might ask, why am I not using 2018? Well, it's very possible that in this program, you'll want to return and use some of these sources again. So if you trim a little bit down there and you're still getting a lot of results, you'll have a little bit more of an envelope to use this. And if you're working through the Nursing 700 sequence of courses, often students will be advised to go ahead and take 2 years off, especially if it's something that's very recent and topical, so that they can reuse those sources later. So in this case, let's see if we're looking for 2019. We still have 300,000 results almost. So we're doing great on the restrictions here, so much that we can do some more restrictive things. So let's go ahead and let's modify this. Now I could just typing more things here, but let's go to advanced search. Advanced search is great for just the visual thing for how it lets us see how things are being separated. And I'm going to put in here quality improvement. Now you'll see that there have been some suggestions for popular terms. We're down to less than 100,000 results here, so we're definitely narrowing down. And I am in fact going to follow one of those instructions and include nursing there. Let's see what that gets us. Okay, 51,000. Okay, so this is still far more than I can go through, and let's just put back on our restrictions here. Sometimes when you switch back and forth between advanced search and basic, you might lose some of these things here, so that's why I'm putting them back on now, and I think I will have plenty of results still afterwards. Now I'm down to 9,500 results. I could make it even more narrow. I saw some results earlier about nursing in the Sudan, and that might be something where I look and say, well, there's so many things that are different about healthcare in Khartoum, Sudan, that maybe I want to limit this to research that has taken place in the United States, and actually limit it to academic journal articles here. And let's see, we have some other things, like you can see we have filtered by geography here. Now that's partly dependent on has it been specifically tagged for that. But again, for this particular assignment, if I select USA there, that's still going to give me far more results than I can review here. Now I can start looking, and if you have a specific policy from the earlier assignment, you can work on that. But let's say I want to go with depression screening here. So I can go ahead and even add another field here and add depression. And you see that you can keep layering things down to get more and more specific, and it's retaining my restrictions over here. And I see, okay, all right, I want to start reviewing these now. And so if I go ahead and I just click on the title here, I'll come up to the catalog entry for this. And we can see information about the author, pediatrics, so that might be something that you're interested in doing. We see it's tagged with quality improvement and depression. And so we see, okay, maybe we want to narrow in on pediatrics. So I'm going to go and refine my search now. And I'm going to add another field, pediatrics. And so now we're getting even more specific, about 1,000 results. Still not worried that I'm leaving out important stuff. Okay, and okay, I'm saying this is looking good. And now I take a look at it and I check the abstract. The purpose of the pilot project was identify adolescents at risk for depression. And they used a convenient sample of 27 patients. Now, if you were writing this up, if you're going through using the form to put this in your appendix, one of the things you might be considering as you're collecting these different articles is what sorts of conclusions or generalizations can you do based on this. Now, this is a pilot project, and so it might have very new up-to-date stuff, and in fact, this article only came out in 2021, so it's barely a year old. But only 27 patients. So as you're thinking ahead to what you would be writing about, well, think about this. Okay, so they start with 27 people who met the criteria, of which 16 were screened for that, and 3 screened positive. Now, again, it's a small number, but if we're having 3 out of 16, that catches my attention. So, as you are looking at other articles, you might see how the ones you select would relate to and build on this, because you are trying to support your policy. And so if there's something that's similar, that even though it might have a smaller group, if it has similar conclusions, you might decide to include that. And by the way, if you decide to use it, go ahead and use this Cite button. It does save a lot of time. You can scroll down to AP 7th edition. I can see there's some minor reformatting. This text here will need to convert to sentence case, but otherwise it will save a lot of time with getting this in my references list. So, in fact, let's go ahead and do that now. So I have here a blank copy of our APA course paper template, and we know that we're going to be discussing these eventually in the appendix section, so might as well go ahead and start adding these to the references list. When you copy and paste, the formatting doesn't quite match, so select this button and select Match Destination Formatting. Alright, now we need the hanging indent and some other stuff, so clicked anywhere into this, if I go up here and select APA Reference, you'll see that it adds the hanging indent, and I can select this text here that I know is going to be needing to be converted to lowercase per APA rules for reference formatting, and so I can do all of that with one click like that. So, alright, so we've got our one article here. It'd be helpful to also have a digital object identifier. Now, not every journal article will have a DOI. That's something that's determined by the journal and whether they've assigned one or not. So in this case, I didn't find one with a quick search, but we've got several other sources to go look at now. So I'm going to go look at the next one in the results. And the more you do this, the more you spot looking at the titles and at the catalog entries here, whether this is something you're interested in. Now this happens to be for the UK. Now, that's alright for my purposes. I'm not bothered by that for this screening. And I want to see, okay, what is this getting me? So let's see, there's some recommendations. And I'm looking at this and saying, okay, well, it highlighted these difficulties. I would like to know more before I spend time reading this, so I'm going to continue on to the next one. Again, the purpose is not to do an exhaustive review here. We want to get the things we need for this assignment, and then there will be other occasions where you can do a more exhaustive review if that's something where your research takes you. Okay, patient and provider perspectives. Okay. Now, this one's in Canada, so I may decide it's not relevant to what I want to do, so I'm just going to pass on. Australian. So you see that the USA restriction that I had earlier is not operative here. So I might try ways to add that on later, but this isn't taking me that long to screen things out. Sepsis management, probably not where I want to go. Alright, so let's go back and look at the results list. Alright, so if we look at this, we find that there are a variety of things here, and we're just not as focused on the depression as I would like. Now, I could continue to try and refine that. But let's go back to this article, because this was really something that resonated with me, like, yes, this is a kind of thing I want to do. Now, if we look at the different options here, we could follow these individual things, but look on the right, we have find similar results. Let's go ahead and give that one a try. And so what this does is it tries to analyze the article and find things that are similar to that. And I can apply different restrictions on that, but in this case I see, hold on, that looks very interesting to me. And I look at it, the abstract here, and I see, yes, they're using specific scales here. They had a larger sample, 30 adolescents. They were, fairly effective. Not perfect, but fairly effective. So, okay, this is one that I want to use. I want to include it in my 5. So I'll go ahead and I will go ahead and grab the citation information. I see, again, I'm going to need to do a little bit of cleanup here, but it'll save me time copying it. And I can also go ahead and use the PDF full text link to grab a copy to download to my computer. And I can see, okay, this is 4 pages, 180, 181, 182, 183. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and paste that here. Again, I want to match the destination formatting. This is a big time saver, but it's only as good as whatever entered the data here, and often it's done by algorithms, so that's where we get these formatting and errors, and where we get some data that's not supposed to be in this particular style. So I'm going to set this to lowercase, and I'm going to remove the month and day information because we don't normally include that for a journal article in APA style. And let's go back to the catalog. All right, and I would download a copy if you were using this. In this case, I'm going back to my search results. I want to see that was pretty good. Let's see what else we have here. Now this is older, so for this search, to make sure that it's still current, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put back on my search restrictions here. And put on the full text restriction, and as well as the scholarly peer-reviewed journal restriction. Now, we still have a ton of results, so not worried about here. During COVID. Okay, that might be very relevant and recent. Let's go ahead and look at this. And so I look at this, and let's say I decide that this is something I want. They had an awful lot of patients. In fact, this is something that was missing from the other stuff. This has quantity. So I'm going to go ahead, and I'm also going to download this, and I'm going to go ahead and add this to my references list. In this case, I can see that the capitalization is mostly what I want. There is a DOI there. I'll talk about formatting that later, but it's mostly there. So, all right, let's go ahead and paste that in here, and that is starting with a Y, so it's going to be going at the end of our references list. And here's what we need to do. First, match the formatting. Because APA style, the first letter, the first word after a colon gets capitalized, we make that change. In this case, we are going to remove this here. Now, what this part does is it means that if you're part of the ACU library, you could click on that and it would open up the article right away. But that is not helpful for people who aren't holding ACU accounts, which is why I've changed it to the standard DOI format so that it will show you where that article lives. Alright, so we've got 3 articles. If you're working on this for yourself, for this assignment, you'll have no problem finding the other 4 and 5. But let's talk about the appendices. Because in APA style, I'm going to zoom out a little bit so you can see the page boundaries. A appendix should start on a new page. So we're going to go ahead, and you could go to a number of places in the menus, or just press Control-Enter if you're on a PC, or Command-Enter if you're on a Mac, and that inserts a page break, meaning we're starting on a new page here. And alright, I'm going to go ahead and zoom in. And here at the top of the new page, we're going to add the heading Appendix. If you only have one appendix, it doesn't need to have a title. You can still give it one. But it doesn't need a letter either, just appendix. So we can go to the Styles pane, and you can add an APA Level 0 heading if you're using a template but that's normally used just for our dissertations and doctoral studies. So in a regular course paper template, the APA Level 1 heading is the one you want. And we can go ahead and start entering things here. You're going to be transcribing something from the book here, but this is where the appendix will live, after the references section. Alright, now if we're talking about how to outline the paper, well, this is when we're going to go back to the instructions here. Now, the instructions here, I've pasted them. We're just going to go ahead and we'll italicize them so it's easy to tell that that's the instructions and not the main thing. The introduction should not have a heading. That's one of those rules in APA style. You just don't include that because we know it's the introduction because it's the start of the paper. But this next one, the main strengths, absolutely. So you can call it something other than main strengths, but that will work for our purposes here. It is descriptive, it is accurate, it is reasonably concise. And so I can select that, and if you don't have it open already, when you're on the home part of the ribbon, there's this button for the styles pane, and select the heading level you want, in this case AP Level 1. If you don't see these headings, then you're not using our template. You can download that from the Writing Center website. But, okay. Right. Discuss the main strengths and then the strength of the evidence. So I'm going to select that. And again, AP Level 1. Now, you could have this be one section, or it could be two. Let's go with 2 here. And in each case, I'm going to select that and make it an AP Level 1 heading. This up here. And then the conclusion will get its own heading here. Alright, so now we have a basic system for organizing things, and as you select your articles, you want to go ahead and add them to the references, and then start writing them up in the appendix using the form from the book. And then you can start adding notes here as well, because you know that some of these will be great strengths, and some of them will be weaknesses that may argue for against. You can take your notes in this document and thus speed up your ability to process this information for the ultimate write-up of the paragraphs for this assignment. You can start with listing the strengths here, and then you might decide, okay, these are the main strengths, especially if you started like, okay, well, a promising percentage but low sample size, and then you find, oh, here's that one with 1,200 people. That's a lot more impactful. That's a lot stronger than the one with only 12 people, for example. So, now if you don't have a copy of our APA course paper template, here's a quick link for you to grab that. And then if you're looking at the instructions and at the slide deck for this presentation, we go through a couple of processes that you have seen me follow here, including how to format the different headings. And then you probably won't have too much trouble with those paragraphs, but if you're not sure where to start, just follow the noteer's plan, and that should be good to go. If you have any questions, feel free to email us at onlinewritingcenter@acu.edu or sign up for an appointment, and you can find links to these videos and other things on the Online Writing Center website.